What's particularly interesting
Brenda must have worn that at some point.
well, not only is there no permit, there wasn't even a permit applied for,
Is that one on?
Yeah.
but there are no drawings.
Hello, everybody.
3D renderings.
Brucey. Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming this afternoon. I really appreciate it. Joe and I have been friends for quite a while, and he has a newsletter, Substack, what do you call it?
Life in the 21st Century.
And it's really fun. And I really like interfacing with Joe and his writing because it really makes me think. And he has a really great bibliography. And so that's fun, even though we don't agree with everything. And there's
No one agrees with everything.
right, but we have really good conversations, and I really value it very much. In his new book, The Politics of Ape and Machine, let's see, what's the subtitle?
Power is organization.
Power is organization. And so one of the things that Joe has in the book is how big power, federal governments, huge corporations aggregate, and the thesis is that they need to decentralize. Yet when he was pitching me on doing this talk this afternoon, while we were talking, I downloaded his book into my Kindle. He made money, but that was all totally an anathema to him. So some of you came today because of my postings on Facebook, which is also a big no-no for all of this. So anyway, it's really great to have him here. The book's very thoughtful, great bibliography, and I'm going to turn it over to Joe Costello.
Great. Thank you all very much for coming. Can everybody hear me? Because I don't want to talk too low. I had to write this down because if I don't, then I'll start traveling all over the place and won't get to the point of it. And number one, so I wrote a book. Actually, this is my third book, and 12 years ago, for my first book, these guys hosted an event, and I thank John and Nancy very much. It's really great to do this. But writing a book is an interesting process in this day and age. We live in 500 years of book culture, and, starting with the Gutenberg press. And everything around us is because books transferred this information and made all this stuff possible. And we're now in this era where the book is going in decline. Now, there was this guy, Marshall McLuhan, who maybe some of you have heard of, and he was around 1960. He wrote a book called The Gutenberg Galaxy, and it was all about how the book created what we consider Western civilization today. And then he wrote a following book 2 years later called Understanding Media, and it was all about how the screen was going to replace the book. And we are right in that process now. And in 1960 when he wrote it, television was really the screen at that point. And to think about it, the screen's only been around, starting with motion pictures, for 100 years, 120 years, 130 years, not much more. So, and the book was around for 500 years. And what he said was this was going to be a very radical process and totally undermine a lot of what we consider Western civilization. And I think we can look at this today and say it's absolutely true. So here we are in New Mexico, and I'd like to start out with the thought by Robert Oppenheimer. And there's 3 or 4 talks that Oppenheimer gave in 1950s and early 60s that are probably the best political speeches to this day of the era that we are in. And everything he talked about, we've done absolutely nothing about. And I'll start out with this first one here. And there's Oppenheimer. Everybody's seen pictures of him these days. So I'll start out with this. We live in a time which has few historical parallels. There are practical problems of the restructuring of human institutions, of their obsolescence and inadequacy, and problems of the mind and spirit, which if not more difficult than ever before, are different and are indeed plenty difficult. And I think that kind of sums up where we're at. And the whole part of my book, bringing my book together was because I was in politics for a while, and I noticed, 30 years ago that the political system was broken and that we had to fix the political system. And that wasn't happening, nor has it happened since. And so it's only gotten worse. So I'll start out now. This unprecedented historical era, this age of anxiety, and I think this is a very anxious age, and I've spent a lot of time traveling in the last couple of years, and every time I come back, America seems more anxious, and it's something that's kind of spread across everybody, and there's all sorts of reasons for that, but the biggest one is it's been brought about by two things, science and technology. All technology derives from science, our understanding how the world works, and in regards to Mr. Oppenheimer, how the universe itself works. From scientific understanding comes our ability to create technology, the human manipulation of the world. That's what technology is. Technology is not science, but it is completely defined by science. That is, we can't do any technology which breaks our understandings of science, but our understanding of science allows us to create all this technology. What also might be added to this is this concept of technic. And I would say politics and technic are the same thing, but technic, there was a guy named Lewis Mumford, who some of you may have heard of again. This was from 60 years ago. He was a contemporary of McLuhan's and talked a lot about technic, which comes from the Greek technikos of art and craft. So technic, so if you have the technology, say if the car's technology, then the factory and everything organized to bring the necessary components, resources to the factory, and then the process of distribution of the products are technic. That's what's involved in creating the technology and how it all comes together and then how it all goes forth. All of these things are political processes, which is what I'm going to talk about. And then all politics, and this is an important thing, because we in America aren't very good about talking about power, but all politics foundation is power. And it's about the discussion of how power is organized and distributed in the country. And I'll return to this. But now we're going to go back farther. Technological manipulation goes way back to our ancestors. 2.5 million years ago, Homo habilis, who first chipped stones, he was the first one, they were the first ones to chip stones and create cutting edges, which was very important technology in human development. And then later, another 1.5 million years later, our other ancestors learned to harness fire, which was another great technology for our ability to control fire. Was an amazing step in human development. Both very much helped define who we are today, which is Homo sapiens, which is considered wise men, which was done like 300 years ago by this guy, Carl Linnaeus, who was one of the first biologists. And I always thought it was a misnomer, wise man. I think we should say clever man. Clever man's a better term. But then the next great technological revolution, and even greater technic or power political revolution, was 10,000 years ago with agriculture. And we began to farm, we began to cultivate plants, and we began to husband animals. This was a gigantic step in human evolution of our society, and that was 10,000 years ago. So only 10,000 years ago. And so for the first, 250, 300,000 years of Homo sapiens, we were hunters and gatherers. We walked around in small groups and we hunted and we gathered. And then we sat down with agriculture. And then just 250 years ago was industrialization. And industrialization is far and away the greatest technological revolution that's happened in human history. And again, it's only 250 years ago. But everything around us is industrialization. And then industrialization, again, going back to technology and science, industrialization's roots are in the great scientific revolution that really started, say, around the 1500s. And specifically, as far as industrial goes in mechanics, and Newton's great physical quantification, which is Well, that's how we'll have a force equal mass times acceleration. That you can say in a nut is industrialization. Like we did a lot with that equation. It moves everything. And then we harness the mass harnessing of fossil fuels. So, the burning of coal, natural gas, and then oil. That's all what you can define as industrialization. And then just 150 years ago, James Clerk Maxwell came up with electromagnetism, which initiated our ability to control electricity. And so I would add that electricity is more than industrialization. It's kind of a whole other ballgame, but I won't go into that. But you all know what electricity does, and it's a very interesting thing. And again, all this was brought about by books. This information was passed on to each other by books. And again, so it's something to think about. We're in an era where the book is slowly going away. What does that mean? It's a big question. And then in the 20th century came the quantum era. And the quantum era begins with Planck's idea of quanta, and these are discrete packets of energy and matter. And so if you go back to the Greeks, we had this continuum. And so the Greeks would think about, say, walking to that couch. And if you did that and just did it half by half by half by half by half, you would never get there. It would kind of be infinite, but it was a continuum kind of a thought, and which is what we think of a lot of things. Where quantum is about these discrete packets and say, so for example, the easiest one is an electron. An electron's kind of around a nucleus somehow, but the electron just goes from one state to another. There's no passing like going and traveling. It just goes, if electron's here and the next state's there, it just goes there. There's nothing in between it. There's no continuum. And so it's a very radical notion about how the universe works, but nonetheless, from that, we got nuclear fission and nuclear fusion, atomic bomb, the transistor, which is all part of this whole compute information revolution. So we haven't yet left the industrial era, and just as industrialism never got rid of agriculture, we've now intertwined industrialism into this new quantum kind of information era, for lack of a better word, which again is only 75 years old. This information era promises and threatens, I would ask, to be as transformative to who we are as both agriculture and industrial has been, and it is happening in many ways at literally the speed of light. Now again, all these transformations have been brought about by science and technology. No technology needs to be. Okay, now this is a very important point, because a lot of things we're saying that, well, we have to just do this, we can do this, so we should do this. And that's not true. This is our choice. But that would require a politics of technology, and we don't have a politics of technology. Just as importantly, once we adopt a given technology, it changes us. To paraphrase Marshall McLuhan, and I started out going, first we shape technology, then technology shapes us. So it's very important. Now, I'll go back again, because we are social animals. That's, we are community animals. We deal with each other. We're not, and how that is defined, how we define our associations with each other, very much define us. And today, overwhelmingly, our associations are defined by very large corporations. And that's just how it works. That's how our life is gone. And polis comes from, which is political, it comes from polis, which is Greek. And the Greek polis was the city, or, but it's more than the city. It's everything about that city. It's the community in the city. The Greeks wouldn't have said, well, Athens is just a polis. When you would say Athens was a polis, it would be both the city and the community would be the polis. And so politics is about that interaction between all those people that make up that polis. So anyway, and then essential part of this is information. And now, what is information? Norbert Wiener, who was a professor at MIT back in like the 40s and 50s, and he said, quote, information is information. It is not matter or energy. Now, you can think about that for a long time. I've thought about it for a long time. But in order to manifest itself, for information to be utilized, it must in some way organize matter or energy. You know, otherwise it's just, it's inert. It doesn't do anything. So now we're on the thick of this information technology revolution where we have machines just producing and communicating information. It is engineering information. And this is a very important thing because Claude Shannon, another guy who, and he developed information theory back in the 40s, and it's fundamental to how compute works and software and everything like that. But the important part of it is, he says very clearly, the semantic aspects of communication are irrelevant to the engineering aspects. So this is a really important to try to think about this, because what's happening with this whole information tech revolution is just the engineering of information. It's not providing it with meaning, it's just engineering the information. The meaning of the information, whatever that is provided on top of that. But this process of creating this whole information architecture is an extraordinary process. I mean, it's just absolutely extraordinary. So I'm not in any way, and one of the things is John made something, I'm not in any way anti-technology. What I'm trying to say is that we have to look at technology as being part of politics, of how we decide how our lives are going to be organized. And it shouldn't be organized from 5 companies out of Silicon Valley. I'll tell you that. That's a disaster. And so how do we do that? It's a good question. So for most of human history, we associated in relatively small groups of people, hunting and gathering. It was information light, right? There was no great advantage to having, nor could you store information anywhere for people to go. It was all stored in our minds. Nor was there any great advantage to having more information than someone else, because life was happening simultaneously to the group all the time. Like, you know, everything was happening all at once. With the foundation of agriculture 10,000 years ago, we became stationary and grew into larger communities. And because I'm not doing this very well. But, so this place is called Göbekli Tepe, and it's in Turkey. And I went there a few years ago. It's just absolutely amazing. And it's from about 10,000 years ago. And it's at the beginning of the agrarian age. And it's kind of where we first started settling down. And it's just quite an amazing, it's these 5 rings about this, you know, about all that. And those are all different kind of sort of proto-statue kind of things. And there's like 4 or 5 of them around. Maybe it's about, you know, 100 meters, 150 meters wide, the whole thing. But I've never been any place that gave me that kind of a sense of being older. I mean, it's a very kind of ancient place. But this is when we started sitting down. And so most of these agrarian, you know, and that was out of this came the cities. And I mentioned Mumford before, and he wrote a great book called The City in History. And if you look at what I'm trying to, in an expansive view of this, the city itself is a technology, right? The buildings are technology, the streets are technology, the sewer systems are technology, all that stuff, the aqueducts, that's all technology. So these are all technologies, you know? And the city's a very old technology, so this is kind of the beginning of this, and this was 10,000 years ago. And most of these communities, and starting to the agrarian age, they were all very centralized power structures and very hierarchical. And one of the reasons they had power was they controlled information, and specifically was the calendar. So if you're an agrarian society and you had control of the calendar, you tell people, okay, now it's time to go plant. Now it's time to go reap. Now it's time to go do whatever else you want to do. But the biggest thing is to reap and to sow was provided by the calendar, and that was controlled by a priesthood. And this is kind of universal across humankind. You know, the controlling of the calendar and a priesthood to control the calendar. And that's really kind of like the first community information in a lot of ways. And so out of that came our initial political constructs that we know as politics, like government, from, and so they have roots that go 10,000 years back. These are our institutions today. They go back 10,000 years, and hierarchy has been one of the main forms of human organization, and so that's what we've got. And then you go across recorded history. The exception to mostly centralized power structures were Greek democracy and the Roman Republic. 2, and this is in recorded history. 2. Most of the rest were centralized, were oligarchies or monarchies or empires. They didn't have and what they had with Greek democracy and Roman Republic, what they were is the enfranchised people. They were both slave societies, and slavery was not an exclusively American construct by any means. Again, universal. Chinese had slaves, Japanese had slaves, Mexicans had slaves, Incas had slaves, Persians had slaves. Slavery is an institution that was long and old in world history. But democracy allowed a more distributed form of control in which the enfranchised, the citizenry assembled to make decisions and to communicate with each other, and they made the decisions, and they were participatory assemblies, both in Greece and in the Roman Republic. The Roman assembly was a participatory assembly, which is too often lost to history. And then there was a limited Republican resurrection during the Renaissance. And what they called republics, it's a longer discussion, but it was brought about because classical thinking came back after being missing from Europe for 1,000 years. Greek and Roman thought came back. That was the beginning of the Renaissance. But it would be another 2 centuries with the founding of the United States that what we today know as modern republicanism came into the world. And so you go look at 250 years ago, if you look at the founding of the United States, and you looked across the whole history of the planet. I mean, the shape of the planet at that point, it was all monarchies, and it was all emperors, and whatever they called their ruler, right? And today, 150 of the countries, there's about 190 of them, have republic in their official title. That started with the American Revolution. I mean, that started with the American Revolution. And so today, 150 of these countries have it. And the biggest innovation of modern republicanism was representative government. So whereas the Greek assemblies and the Roman assemblies were participatory, we created elected representatives. And that was the first time in history. Greek and Rome were not representatives, they were participatory assemblies. So that's a big deal. And so, let me see where we're at here. And then, so again, with the founding of the American Republic, the scientific revolution, which had started 250, 300 years before, you can go, was just gaining ever more speed, right? It was gaining ever more speed. Again, made possible by the book. And when the U.S. was birthed, 90% of the population was farmers. with a few technological changes, the life of the average American 250 years ago is as similar to the small farmer of Greece and Rome as it was to us 250 years later. So their lives were similar on a day-to-day basis to people's 2,000 years ago than it was to ours. And so that was the government they created. And nonetheless, today, we have those same exact institutions of government that we had 250 years ago, and institutions based in large part on those of 2,000 years ago, not just 250, and that were agrarian, not industrial. And this is very important. And the simple fact is, however much democracy you've ever wanted to ascribe to America's republic, and compared to what for almost 2,000 years before, it was plenty, these institutions were made largely impotent with industrialization. So this is important to think about, because when you're looking at the way things go. In fact, at the end of the 19th century, one of the great democratic movements in American history and even world history, American yeoman farmers organized together to try to figure out how to control the new industrial technologies and the resulting politics. Specifically in this case, the railroads, the telegraph, and in regards to power, the technic, the political power of Eastern banking. These three things allowed the consolidation and centralized control of farm markets. The questions for the farmers became how to keep their democratic power. And what's important to understand about this is that these farmers were enfranchised, and most of and I'm talking, this is like 1870s, 1880s, 1890s. And so this was the old American Agrarian Republic. And the old Agrarian American Republic was largely done at the local level. Most people had no idea of any interconnection with Washington during that time, because Washington was growing on itself, but it was a farm republic. Everything was done local. Things were done at the county level, or things were done at town halls and town meetings. So when this started, they started losing this power. They knew they were losing the power, right? Because that's the thing with power, is those who have power understand very much where their power is, and they understand where it comes from. Those who are having power imposed on them, it's a much different process, because it's a lot harder to understand where this power is coming from, or how exactly it's shaped. This guy, Lawrence Goodwin, wrote this book called Democratic Promise, which is one of the great books of American history, and it's about the whole populist movement, which is, again, it was one of the great democratic movements they lost of American history, but it was an amazing thing. These guys organized all over the country for 20 years, and it was quite an incredible thing. But from this book, Democratic Promise, there's this guy, James Murdoch, of the Progressive Farmer. So he's of the era. He's one of the populist Progressive Farmers, a newspaper. And he located the cause of widespread hardship in the political backwardness of the nation's leaders and party system. Quote, "We are in the era of steam, railroad, telegraph, and mammoth machinery. The financial political system that answered to the age of the slow coach, sickle, and spinning wheel will not respond to this. We have had a revolution in manufacturers and transportation, and we must have a radical change in our financial and political system." That's what the populists thought. I would say you could take this today and put it exactly to where we're at today. That this new technology is just changing everything in our old institutions, as Oppenheimer said, are obsolescent and inadequate. And that's the first thing to think about when you're thinking about politics in America today. So you had one of the backwards dirt farmers of the era giving what is the politics of technology, which I've been trying to talk to people about for 25 years. So here we are. So the real victors were the corporation, and the corporation was the real social innovation of industrialism. You know, it had longer roots, but it really was that became the social structure of the innovative social structure of industrialization, the agrarian democracy went down and down and down and down to disappearing. And the corporation is not a democratic institution. It's a, I don't know what's the right word for it. It's centralized, it's autocratic. There's a couple people at the top making decisions for everybody else. So oligarchic. And, and what's important to understand is that the corporation, when I talk about this technique, is just as important to industrialization as the steam engine was. It's just as important in innovation. And, we haven't dealt with it well. And so what I would say about industrialism is no one, capitalist, unionist, socialist, communist, anarchist, add whoever you want, ever figured out industrial democracy. We never figured it out. And a foremost reason for this is almost universally no one ever included technology as politics. In fact, if you look at most political science over the years, they'll say politics is neutral. Technology is neutral. It has no real political meaning. And there couldn't be anything further from the truth, but that's where we are. That there has been various thinking about the control over technology with the idea of markets, or say with Marx, all about who controls the means of production. But understanding the control of the means of production only gets you partway there. The actual means of production and what is produced are themselves politics. Again, the adoption of any technology reorganizes society, changing the relation of power in all sorts of ways. So now here we are today with new technologies and technologies exclusively devoted to the creation, organization, storage, and implementation of information. With new technology, compute technology, the transistor, and their electric networking, a mixture of electromagnetism and quantum mechanics, if you will. Most recently, atop everyone's minds, you can't get away from it, is a new generation of this technology being marketed as AI. And so I'm not keeping up on this, I'm sorry. So anyway, this is the NVIDIA chip. NVIDIA chip, or trip maybe. But on that chip, it's about that big, there's 200 billion transistors. 200 billion. If you spent your life counting to 1 billion, you'd go 60 years. And that's all you did. So these are numbers that are like fantastical on one level, but they work, and the equations work, and the technology works, And then 10 terabytes per second of the communication inside the chip. A terabyte is 1 trillion. That's 10 trillion things moving around per second. It's just incredible technology. It's just amazing technology. And what I can tell you, first and foremost, the technologists are not the people to be making the decision on what to do with it. They may know how to do it, but they don't know how we should be adopting it. And again, that's the politics of technology. And so it's just really quite incredible. So then, now added to this, and because what this is going to do, and this is what I'm going to say to you, whenever anyone says artificial intelligence, just think automation. Okay? Because that's the best way to think about this. This is a step up in the ability for us to automate all sorts of things. And so when these guys talk around, come and say they're going to take your job, believe them. That's one thing you can believe them about. If they're telling you they're making a new God, don't believe that, because they want to be the God, so don't believe that. But when they say they're going to be able to automate, this is going to be good. When we say it's not going to be good, something should be automated. My dad worked in a factory for 30 years, and when I was born, and he hated his job from day one. Was always trying to get out of there. So, like those jobs, it's great, but you have to rethink all sorts of things about how society works. If people don't have jobs, so then what are they going to be? And the job is an industrial construct. Only 250 years has the notion of a job been around. Before that, you were a farmer. You weren't a farmer. It wasn't a job. You were just a farmer, or you were a blacksmith. It wasn't a job being a blacksmith. You were a blacksmith. That's who you were. So anyway, how this, again, it's all about automation, just thinking about that. And so now I'll go back to Norbert Wiener, because he's like a very important guy. And there's Norbert Wiener, and he wrote this book in 1948 called Cybernetics, or Control and Communication in the Animal and the Machine. And what that is he developed the concept of feedback. He developed it more. It was actually Maxwell who kind of first did it, but he did it more. And feedback is just this idea that when an action is taken and it does something, and you have an effect, there's a feedback to whoever or whatever system did the action. It's a very simple thing, but all automation needs to have that built into it. That's the bottom of automation. And Wiener also did some of the math, which is underneath the bottom of a lot of this automation. He was like one of the most brilliant guys. And if you want to read a great book, Cybernetics, it's got a fair amount of math in it, but there's another book called The Human Use of Human Beings. And he was talking about all that's happening today. He was talking about it 75 years ago. And he was saying we are not in any position to deal with this. And he was right. So that's what he says. And so he wrote about the technologist. The gadget-minded people often have the illusion that a highly automatized world will make smaller claims on human ingenuity than the present one, and will take over from us our need for difficult thinking, as a Roman slave, who was also a Greek philosopher, might have done for his master. This is palpably false. A goal-seeking mechanism will not necessarily seek our goals unless we design it for that purpose. And in that designing, we must foresee all steps of the process for which it is designed. The penalties for errors of foresight, great as they are now, will be enormously increased as automation comes into its full use. And so this massive push, like to go and say these centralized data centers to do automation the way they want to do it, it should be just stopped right at this point, and we need to rethink this. It's not good. It's not good. I will say that. Again, I'm not anti-technology, but what I'm trying to say is technology is politics. We need to decide how we're going to do this and how we're going to develop it. That's the whole point. And so then I'm getting it to the end. Sorry, it took me a little longer. So Wiener's concept of feedback is an important mechanism for the politics of technology. Even the greatest foresight can never completely understand the impact of adopted technology. It is only through feedback, robust, universal, and democratic, can we really understand a technology's impact. It is only through organization, the organization of power, that we can create healthy and constructive systems of feedback. And so, so I'll conclude here. And on this note of feedback, I think this is also very important. Industrialism, we didn't do feedback. And we completely paved the planet, okay? We completely changed the ecology of the planet. And there were all these people going, we're losing all these species, water pollution, air pollution, all this stuff. And the industrialism just went full forward. And so, because they did not have feedback. We did not have good feedback systems, because if you're going to have feedback, political feedback, you got to have functioning politics. And again, we had these institutions of government that weren't just 250 years old, they're 2,000 years old. I mean, they go back to Rome and Greece in many ways. So anyway, I just want to say, we live an amazing time in human history, yet we, the social animals we are, have no politics for it. What we mislabel in many ways today as politics is corrupt and dysfunctional, but not because, or should I say, not just because of the people involved, but the present processes and institutions are not just up to snuff. As Oppenheimer said, we need to deal with the obsolescence and inadequacy of our institutions. And he's not just talking about our government institutions, he's talking about everything. And I would also suggest that the corporation as an industrial institution, who was very good at developing and implementing technology, is not a great way to do this information. It's not a sufficient method to deal with this information. And so then I'll just end with the, another quote by Oppenheimer, and it goes, the notion of deciding something, really one of the basic traits of being a person, and perhaps that function where one is most concerned with its integrity. Now, integrity is a word that you don't hear much these days of. The whole area of responsibility has become extremely befogged and clouded. We talk to each other about our responsibilities and duties, and in simple situations, the family, parts of the community, we recognize them. We try to live up to them, but our duty to the larger units, to humankind and so on, these are very foggy notions. No one really has any sense of what does devolve on them, what they as a person can do. There is a frightful disproportion between our willingness to undertake a true or secular responsibility and our ability to find any way at all to do it. So there we are. All this creates this great anxiety, yet in the end, it is all our responsibility. And if we just start talking with each other, face to face, and acknowledge we are all in the same boat, we will first lessen our trepidation and begin creating a future much brighter than our fears will allow. That's it.
So that was all real easy, and and you can see why I really enjoyed this book. Like I said, it really gets one to think. I'd have to stop every couple paragraphs, look up a couple words, great bibliography, and that's what was so fun. I really want to thank Joe for coming down and doing this, and thank you all for coming out to see it. As we had these discussions, and he talked about the importance of community and people getting together face to face, I said, well, heck, we can do that, and here we are, so it's pretty fun. We were also using a telephone, which could double as a television station, which is another thing we're facing with this, so it's kind of interesting. So any questions? We can do a couple of formal questions and then just break out and chat, and there's food and drink. You all help yourselves too.
And I have books to sell.
Any questions? Except you. Just teasing.
I'll try to keep it simple. Do you have even one suggestion that could describe the kind of goal you're asking us to visualize and work toward?
Yeah, this was my,
Well, this
here,
is.
wait, here it is. No, don't tell me you're not going to do this. Okay, here it is. That's traditional hierarchy. It's pyramid structure, right? And the top has all the power, and then it goes down and down, and then there's vast many people at the bottom who are, doing what the top says. We need to go here. This is a distributed network. This is life. This is nature. That doesn't exist in nature. Hierarchies like that don't exist in nature. This is nature. This is us here. And all that surrounds us in nature, it's all like we may think we're there at the top of that pyramid, but trust me, we're still in the middle of this. And we can't go beyond this in a way that doesn't in some way intertwine with that and work with that. And industrialization has been in a lot of ways reordering that, right? But we could do things a lot better if we look at how nature actually works and uses the processes of nature instead of just trying to go on top of them. And we know more and more. I mean, like I used Linnaeus, in 300 years, biology is a very new science compared to physics. Physics goes all the way back to the Greeks. I mean, so does biology in some ways, but fundamental physics and, math and equations very solid, whereas a lot of the Greek biology wasn't too great. But really, it's been in the last 100 years where our understanding of biology has really taken off. And so that's going to be how do we redo things? And again, I'll say for America, we have this local government infrastructure, so we can and we need to bring power back into the local so that people can start making decisions And then we need to network the local. Instead of going like, so there you could go, there's the local, and the mid-level's the state, and the top is the federal government. That's how we work things now, right? Instead, we could just distributedly network all these things and have the cities talk to cities about what they're doing, have them work together about various things, have the counties talk to the counties, and all this. So, I mean, what we have to do is create massive communication channels, which don't exist. Right now, our communication channels are largely that. And if we distribute them, and like this one's a little bit not quite right, because if you want to look at this right, it would be like this one is also connected to that one, and that one is also connected to this one directly, you know? And it's very complex. And so that is how we have to start thinking about how we do things. And what they're doing with these data centers is completely opposite that.
It seems like we need to visualize things that are all over that have to work together, like the ocean,
Right.
for instance. And that way we have a model of what can go wrong there and what can, you know, and
I mean, I think if someone right now could come, and it's certainly not me, but someone, and it's no one, but if someone could come right now and go, look, this is how you need to put this together, and this is how it would work, and they would be absolutely right. Say if they had the we wouldn't be able to understand it, because we're not part of how it works right now. So we got to develop it. Jefferson talked about ward republics. Like that was the fundamental part of government, was to have ward republics. And he said, and then have them start talking to each other. And he ended by saying, and we can't possibly know what they can do, so just get them going. And then once they get going, they'll be able to figure out what to do. And that's what I think. And that's why I'm saying people need to just start coming together and talking, you know? And they're not talking like this political system that we have today. Nobody's talking in this political system. It's just ridiculous. And that's fundamental to democracy, is communication, education, communication, decision-making, and then action.
visualization, and so I'm sure that the ocean isn't the only model that all has to work together.
No, it's everything.
Well, I know, but we still have to have a model to be able to analyze what's working and what's not. I mean, it seems to me. I mean,
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's starting by just starting to put it together. And again, I think like once you start putting it together, you'll start figuring out how it works. In California, okay, go ahead. I'm sorry, go ahead.
That's a Buckminster Fuller and Kenneth Nielsen structure. And it's discontinuous compression and continuous tension. And Fuller designed a bridge that would bridge the Atlantic from US to Europe using that structure. But he learned it from Kenneth Nielsen, who was a sculptor. And I think that what has to happen is that art is the most accessible universal language that we have. And we tried Esperanto and that never took hold. But art is a universal language that can help in what you're talking about. Because structures like that come out of the artist's mind, as well as just understanding how the universe fits together.
Right.
So, you know, that's another thing that was a complex thing that I heard at Naropa in Boulder, but it basically was that art should be the universal means of exchange instead of money.
Yeah, well, money is an information system, you know? So it's like part of like how we reform. Part of it has to do with, you know, money is like, it's a very primitive one, but it's very, you know, it's a very strong force in how we organize our world today.
One other thing is I would only argue with your timeline. I think your whole premise is fine, but in human development, I think it's older, it happened sooner, and it happened in more places than the Eurocentric model that seems to.
Yeah, that's what I did a very Eurocentric model. I agree. So I mean, I'm not
But
trying
it's
to.
a broad brush, you're using a broad brush.
Yeah. I'm trying. There, I'm trying to use an example, so like people can at least grasp it. But in no way am I. Yeah, I agree, 100%.
I think art's the answer too. I agree.
Question.
I think we probably agree that art is the answer, and we probably agree with the notion of local networking. But generative, what do you say about generative AI? I mean, that rocket has already been launched, and so it teaches itself, right? And if everyone who worked on that had taken the Hippocratic oath, that would be wonderful. But given that that isn't the case today, what do you say about citizens doing something?
I don't think any AI teaches itself at this point. It's all getting information that's already there. There's nothing. There's no. Someone used the other day fidelity to AI. Nor is there any innovation in AI. What they're doing is taking established data, and because it's that, like I said, it's this this chip. It's so powerful, and I've known a lot of people in computers for a long time and database people, and so it's search. I mean, it's very powerful search, and it's sophisticated software. I'm not saying that it's not, but it's not innovative at this point. It hasn't left the barn. Right now, what they're talking about to build all these data centers requires this amazing amount of energy. So you stop the energy, say, no, we're not going to do this. It's very easy, and it can be stopped at the local level. They need all sorts of new generation plants, and they're talking about building a nuke in everyone's backyard. So, people have to understand this. And so part of it is, and which is interesting, is because electricity system is still very much got local control to it and state control. They could stop the building of these generation plants right now, and that'll stop what they're doing right in its tracks. And I didn't get into this, but one of the things to understand is once a technology gets established, it confines future technology, and same with the technologists thinking. Once they know one thing and how it works, then they just go down that road. So what they're doing right now is not necessarily the only way to get eventual results that we may want to get out of this. And the thing is, and this is why, again, I'm saying about the politics of technology, we have to bring that into the discussion about what's going on. And you can't stop it. It can be stopped right now, very easily, because, in fact, I would, I can't see how they could build all this energy that they're talking about that they need for this. I don't see that happening, even if people didn't step up to stop it. But people should step up to stop it, and then go and say, like what you're saying, well, what does all this mean? Because I think the whole thing with AI cuts across all the political walls that are out there right now, and everybody is interested in it. Because you go, and what you were saying, the universal thing now is to understand we're one species, and we are on this one little planet. And one of the things that's happened in the last 50 years, for the first time in human history, the vast majority of people understand we're on this just one little planet. Now what that means, I don't know, but it's an important concept.
What I love about that, when you said we're all on one little planet, I had a really great science teacher in 7th or 8th grade, and the first assignment at the beginning of the year was for us to all build terrariums in those 5-gallon glass water bottles. And our grades were who could keep their terrarium sustainable the longest during the course of the school year. It was really a great exercise that never left me. We're on a big terrarium.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any other questions for Joe before we break up and
Before we
start
give up.
drinking profusely? Yes.
Go ahead.
So, in southern New Mexico, there's a big data center proposed, and it's gotten some opposition from the state Congress, although the county in Joniana voted to let it in. And one of the problems is the information, going back to priests and farmers and who controls information. There's such a spin on it, and also the promise of lots and lots of money. But I was looking at the Spanish-speaking newspaper down in the area where they want to build it, and the headline was hundreds of jobs. And And they say they're gonna manage the water, they're gonna generate.
they
the
say.
gas, they're gonna do this, they're gonna do this, they're gonna do billions.
Right.
And, you know, there's a lot of controversy about it, and I think the most important thing, getting back to your network of people, is information channels and how those channels can be kept honest.
But that's what you have to create. I mean, that's what you have to create. And I'm saying to create it from face to face. Where we are most human is face to face communication. Anytime you put any kind of media in between it, there's a power in that media. Who controls that media? And so the biggest thing, so this has all got to be rebuilt, right? And just to say, like, they are going up here and there, but there's been, like, in the last 2 years, like 64 of them have been stopped in various places because local zoning goes into it. The question of electricity, again, local control of all this. So they are being stopped. And the thing is that all these things need to start being connected so that we can start talking about this where we're at, you know? And again, with AI, it's like, and you know, these knuckleheads are going away saying, we're gonna take away all your jobs. Well, what does that mean? So compute, if you can look at the history of compute for 75 years, it's the result of it has been the centralization of more and more wealth and power. That's it. That's been it. And so now you're going to go and say, well, now we're going to get rid of a whole bunch more jobs. Well, what are these people going to do? And how are they going to survive? How are they? What is the thing that's going to make them? Because in industrialism, it was the job, right? So now what? And what I would say, most importantly about all this, is markets can do information, but the real role of information, of creating, editing, communicating, decision making, is with the citizen. And the citizen is gone from America today. There are no citizens in America today. So how do we rebuild that? That's the question. And I don't have the direct answer except for you just got to start doing it. And the biggest step is starting to talk to each other without the interference of these other forces. And then you build up from there. I don't know if that's the answer you're looking for, but that's the only one I got.
Anyone else? Any other questions? Russ?
Just, one of the things that's going on that we don't realize is that, you know, America is fighting electric cars. Well, on one hand, electric cars are a solution to, you know, fossil fuel pollution and all that. But on the other hand, it's kind of ridiculous to even have an electric car if we had a decent public transit system.
Yeah, exactly.
And America is about 50 years behind China right now in terms of we have no maglev trains in America. They were invented in England. And the Chinese are the only ones that actually put a full system in.
Right.
And what we don't realize on the other hand is that the most amount of electricity used right now wouldn't be for electric cars or lights or computers or anything else. It's to keep Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies running.
Yeah.
They require huge computer space and a huge amount of energy. NFTs and all that stuff.
Right. Well, that's
Just sucking the energy out.
But that's what AI, and AI is an amazing energy suck. That's the whole point. And that's the whole thing. It's like going, you know what, we got to do this differently. So like some of the things is, and as far as cars, I've been trying to do politics of cars for 50 years, and Americans don't want to hear about it. And this is the important thing about technology is once a technology gets entrenched, it becomes natural. It becomes like, this is how it works. So I've spent many years talking to Americans about how we can restructure the transportation system and we don't need cars. And it's just beyond their conception. It's like telling a fish, well, you don't need water. So this is part of the politics of technology and to understand this, you know, and we've just been going along like technology is like, you know, it's determinative and it can just go, but it's not. We have to start looking at this and how we do things. And to get the oil for these cars for the last 50 years has caused chaos around the whole globe, chaos and bloodshed across the whole globe. And most Americans don't want to acknowledge that, but that's what's happened. And you know, like I was in Nigeria, I spent a year in Nigeria in doing a presidential election. So for 30 years, the military junta that was the head of Nigeria was funded by oil. And that oil, for that 30 years, if you filled up your car in America, 1 of the gallons of that was coming from Nigeria. So that was directly funding what was just a disastrous regime in Nigeria for 30 years. So all this stuff gets connected, you know, and so we gotta figure it out. And again, my point is our politics today is completely incapable of doing that. So we need to reinvent that.
So we're divesting from Bitcoin and we're going all in T-money. So this is T-money that
There you
I got
go.
totally, so different kinds of money there. Did someone have a question here?
She,
Suki?
Okay, what was I gonna say? One thing that you said was that, what are people gonna do? And that struck me, that's a big question. And I guess the power structure that you pointed out, the thing that I just think about is that they don't care.
no. Well, they want
They
their
don't care
power.
if people don't have anything to do, and if they're not gonna have any money, any food, it's coming.
Power's-
So-
Power's an addictive drug. You know, I don't know if you guys, probably, Hunter Thompson, he wrote a book about big time presidential American politics and called it Better Than Sex. So,
What did
there
he
you go.
mean?
Well, you can read the book, but it wasn't what he meant. But so yeah, so no, but that's like, how do we, you know, how do we redo this? That's the big question. And to me, it's a really intriguing question, and it offers a